Okay, Christmas may be over, but that doesn't mean I can't still read a story or two. And of course, it's the Grinch again. This time, it's the movie Storybook. And it was written by Louise Gickow. It was 3 days, 16 hours, and 32 minutes before Christmas. And every Who in Whoville who wasn't trimming a tree or decking a hall was out shopping, including Cindy Lou Who, her father, and her father Lulu Who. Hold on. Lou loved Christmas shopping, all Whos did, except for Cindy Lou, who, like many young people, was beginning to question things. And one of the big things she was questioning was the true meaning of the holiday. Was Christmas really about buying and giving presents, or was there more to it than that? Cindy Lou didn't need or want anything from Santa Claus. In fact, the idea of buying someone another snoozle phone just didn't seem very important. But Cindy Lou's brothers, Drew and Stu, knew exactly what was important. They had decided to play hooky from school and climb Mount Crumpet with Junie and Christina in search of some mistletoe. "Where are we?" asked Junie as they trampled up the mountain, past the old Whoville dump. "I think we should go back." "What, are you afraid of the Grinch?" Stu said with a laugh. Of course they all were. Every Who in Whoville was afraid of the Grinch. He had a terrible reputation, and he lived, they say, in a vast dark cave at the very tippy top of Mount Crumpet, exactly where the teens were headed. "There's no such thing as the Grinch," said Junie. The furry green figure behind the periscope snickered when he heard this, for he made it his business to know everyone that went on Mount Crumpet, and he had a whole slew of gizmos and devices to help him spy and keep Mount Crumpet blessedly free of Whos. "For Whos, one Grinch," he muttered to his faithful dog Max. "I'll take such odds." When they arrived at last at the top of the mountain, wheezing and out of breath, the Who teens found a door set into the rock. Beneath the door lay a mat, an unwelcome mat, that is. "It doesn't look like anyone lives here," said Stu, who was in a hurry to get back to Whoville. But he was wrong. The Grinch lived there. The door creaked open. A hideous monster sprang at them. The teens raced down the mountain, screaming at the top of their lungs. They could never say exactly what they saw, except that, whatever it was, it certainly had a lot of teeth. The news was soon all over town. The teens had experienced their first ever Grinch sighting. At least that's what they thought they saw. Nobody in Whoville was pleased to hear this. It was, after all, only 3 days until the Christmas Eve Whobilation. Lulu Who just shrugged it off. "You know how kids are," he told Mayor August May Who. "I'm sure the kids didn't see any Grinch." The mayor just shuddered, but Cindy Lou wasn't frightened. She was curious. "Dad, who's the Grinch?" she asked on the way to school. "We'll talk about that later. You've got to get to class." Cindy had asked a very good question, even if she didn't get an answer. Just who was the Grinch? Some Whos thought he was a Who who'd gone bad. Others thought, well, who knows? Most Whos didn't like to think about him at all. But every Who in Whoville was certain of this. The Grinch hated Christmas, the whole Christmas season. And Cindy Lou Who was one Who was determined to find out the reason why. Whoville Elementary School was not so very different from the school you go to, except that the most important subject they studied all year round was, you guessed it, Christmas. They studied from the Book of Who, where rules and regulations for Hula Day celebrations were set down in black and white and red and green. It was time for the students at Whoville Elementary School to announce the themes they'd chosen for their Hula Day reports. "The origins of Sandy Claus," said one Who girl. "Gift wrapping oddly shaped presents," said another Who. "Christmas trees, how many are too many," said a Who boy. "The Grinch and why he doesn't like Christmas," said Cindy Lou. At that, every window shade in the room snapped up, every jaw dropped open. "Cindy Lou Who," gasped the teacher, Miss Roo Who. "We do not discuss that sort of thing in school." The very day Miss Roo Who called Mr. Lulu Who, she demanded he come to his daughter's classroom promptly after school. Mr. Lu Hu, your daughter, Miss Ru Hu spluttered. She said, "Oh my." Miss Ru Hu was so scandalized words failed to come to her lips. Lu Hu noticed softly. "I think I know what she said, Miss Ru Hu. I'm sure we can straighten this thing out." He turned to his daughter. "Cindy, come help out your old man at the post office, and we'll have a talk." "You see," Lou explained as he stood behind the counter at the post office, helping the first in a long line of Whos get their packages is posted in one heck of a rush. "The Grinch is a who, well, is not really a who, he's more of a what that doesn't like Christmas." "Oh, Postmaster Lu Hu," cried a voice from the line. It was Mayor Mayhew. "Uh-oh," said Lou. He turned to Cindy. "I'm pretty busy right now. Would you mind storing some mail out back until we can finish our talk?" Cindy Lou didn't mind. She went in the back and started sorting mail and putting it into slots. It was a task someone else had already started, but that someone was putting mail into the wrong slots. And while he was at it, he was sending out fake jury duty notices, chain letters, and nasty notes. Who was that someone? That someone was the Grinch. You see, the Grinch didn't always stay up in his cave on Mount Crumpet. Sometimes he came down to Whoville, cleverly disguised, to make all kinds of Grinchy mischief. When Cindy Lou caught sight of him, she was so flabbergasted why she fell smack into the stamping machine. She was about to be crushed flat when, against his better judgment, the Grinch surprised himself. He rescued her. He pulled her out of the stamping machine. Then, before he could leave well enough alone, he wrapped her up like a Christmas present and went on his merry way. Wasn't Lou surprised when he came in the back in search of his daughter and found a familiar voice calling out to him from a pile of parcels? After Lou unwrapped his daughter, he and Cindy went home. There they were not the least surprised to find Mrs. Betty Lou Hu up on the roof, hanging strings of Christmas lights. You see, each year in Whoville, there was a Christmas lights competition, and each year, Betty's neighbor, Martha May Whovier, won the competition. Some Who said it was because Mayor Mayhew, who judged the contest, was sweet on Martha May. Some Whos were right. Nevertheless, Betty was sure that this year she would defeat Martha for the first time ever. The Lou Hu house was totally festooned with crystal, Miss Lights. It was a dazzling, spectacular, genuine megawatt tour de force. On the outside, at least. The inside was another story. Cindy Lou peered in the front door. "But it's dark inside," she said. "Feel your way around, dear," called Mrs. Lu Hu from up on the roof. "And could you be Mommy's little helper and bring me that light bulb from the refrigerator, too?" Shaking her head sadly, Cindy entered the darkened house. The next day, Cindy commenced her report on the Grinch. She started with an interview on the Who Biddy sisters, Clarinara and Rose. The sisters, Cindy Lou knew, had raised the Grinch from when he was very small. "How did the Grinch come to you?" Cindy Lou asked. For the interview, she brought along her tape recorder to record everything that she said. That was it. "He came all the way, Who babies come," Clara reminisced softly, "on calm nights. They drift down from the sky on little pumpercellas. It was 40 years ago this Christmas Eve. We were having our annual Hula Day celebration. It was morning before anybody realized he was out there. Poor dear. We knew right away he was special. He was a wonderful little whatever he was, and we raised him like any other Who child." Cindy Lou went on to interview Martha May Whovier and Mayor Mayhew. She found out something that made her very, very sad and a little bit mad. She found out that all the Whos went to school with the Grinch, especially young Mayhew, had been very mean to him because he wasn't like them. He was different. Only one Who had been kind, and that Who was Martha. When the Grinch was 8 years old, he had been quite sweet on Martha, it seems. He had made a special Christmas present for her. It was an angel that he made of scrap metal and parts he found at the Whoville dump. He was very proud of it. So that Christmas Eve, the Grinch went to school with a paper bag on his head, the angel in his hands, and Martha May in his heart. Miss Ru Hu made the Grinch take off the bag. All the children laughed and pointed. You see, the Grinch had tried to shave off his green fur because the other kids made fun of it. The Grinch's face was covered with nicks and cuts, and he looked, well, even worse than usual. I don't know what's worse, the hack job he did on his face or the hack job he did with his gift, sneered Mayhew, who had come with store-bought gifts for Martha May. In that moment, the Grinch knew he could never fit in with the Whos. He was ugly and green, and his present was junky, and Martha May would never be his. He ran for the door, knocking over the Christmas tree and making a mess of the classroom. He never came home that night, Clarinara said, shaking her head sadly. In fact, the mayor also recalled, that was the last time we ever saw him. No thanks to you, thought Cindy Lou, and that's when she hatched her plan. The next day was Christmas Eve, the day of the annual Christmas Jubilation. Every year, the Whos elected someone to be the holiday cheermeister. Cindy Lou nominated the Grinch. At first, every Who in Whoville was horrified, mostly the mayor because he wanted the job. But Cindy stood her ground. After all, she said, reading to them from the Book of Who, the cheermeister is the one who deserves a backslap or a toast. It goes to the soul at Christmas who needs it most, and I believe that soul is the Grinch. Cindy Lou looked up at the assembled crowd, and if you're the Whos I hope you are, you will too. At first, all that could be heard was sniffles. Then the crowd burst into applause. It was settled. The Grinch would be that year's cheermeister. But who was going to tell him? Cindy climbed Mount Crumpet and asked the Grinch to be cheermeister. And the Grinch, with a little bit of coaxing from his faithful dog Max, accepted the honor. With a little help from Max, the Grinch dressed in his holiday best for the event. He tried to be a good sport. Really, he did. He put on the sweater the Who Biddy's sisters knitted him, which was 5 sizes too small. He sat in the chair of cheer. He judged the pudding cook-off. He led the Christmas conga line. He did vigorous exercise. He blessed the children. He led yet another Christmas conga line. He drank galleons of Christmas nog. And then it came time for the present pass-it-on. But unfortunately, no one had told the Grinch he needed to bring a present, and that, the Whos learned, was a very big mistake. Of course, the mayor used the occasion to give Martha May a diamond ring and a new car. The Grinch could not help but remember that day back in Whoville Elementary School, the day of his great humiliation. And in a way, he was really reliving that day all over again today. Well, as you can imagine, it was more than the Grinch could bear. That's what it's always been about, isn't it? Gifts, 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 gifts. Well, let me tell you what happens to your gifts. They all end up coming to me, in your garbage, in the dump. The hushed Whos watched as the Grinch spun around and headed for Mount Crumpet. But before he did, a fearful, frightful, fiendish idea stole into his furry green head. Slowly he turned around. And, oh, I'm a terrible cheermeister. I forgot to light the tree. And with that, he lit the tree all right. He set the great Christmas tree in Whoville Square on fire. Later, back on Mount Crumpet. I've got to do something, the Grinch muttered as he paced the floor of his cave. I must stop this Christmas from coming. But how? And that's when he came up with an ingenious plan, the crowning achievement of his glorious career as a Christmas kabosher. First, he needed a reindeer. He looked around. No reindeer in sight. Then he caught sight of Max. Max shrewd away. With some answers, you'll do fine, the Grinch said with a grin. Then he suited up a costume. It was white with red trim. Can you guess what it was? A Santa Claus suit, of course. Then he hitched up Max to a sleigh, and he was off. While the Whos down in Whoville were fast asleep in their beds, the fake Santa Claus stole down their chimneys into their houses and took all their presents and their decorations and stuffed them up their Who chimneys and piled them into his sleigh. He cleaned out every Who refrigerator and every Who Christmas tree. He even stole their stockings. It was the very last house, at Cindy Lou Who's house, while he was stuffing the tree up the chimney, that he almost got caught. Cindy Lou herself came downstairs at that very moment. She stood there, rubbing her sleepy little eyes. Santa, what are you doing with our tree? She asked. There's a light on this tree that won't light on one side, the Grinch lied. I'm taking it home to my workshop to fix it. Santa, Cindy yawned, don't forget the Grinch. I know he's mean and hairy and smelly, but I think he's actually kind of sweet. Hearing this, the Grinch gulped. When the Whos awoke that Christmas morning, they were in for a shock. Everything, their presents, their trees, their decorations, their holiday food, was gone. In their jammies and slippers, they came together in the town square. It was the Grinch, cried Mayor Mayhew. Cindy Lou Who, I hope you're proud of what you've done. Cindy Lou shrank from the mayor's gaze, and a tear fell down her cheek. But Lulu Who stepped up and put his arm around his daughter. Well, if she isn't proud, then I am, he said. I'm glad the Grinch took our presents, because presents are not what Christmas is all about. Gifts and contests and colored lights. I guess that's what Cindy's been trying to tell everyone. Christmas is about being together with our families and loved ones, and that's all. From atop Mount Crumpet, the Grinch peered down at the Whos. He expected to hear a wail of woe, but instead, what did he hear? He heard the sound of Whos singing a sweet Christmas carol. The Grinch hadn't stopped Christmas from coming. It had come anyway. At that very minute, Cindy Lou Who was coming up Mount Crumpet to ask the Grinch to join the Whos' celebration. In spite of himself, the Grinch felt something warm swell in his chest. What was it? Can you guess? No one is quite sure, but the Whos think it might have been his heart. His cold little Grinchy heart just might have started to grow. The Grinch, Max, and Cindy Lou flew down the hillside in the Grinch's sleigh, the Whos' Christmas presents and decorations and stockings and food jouncing in the great big bag behind them. They came to a screeching halt in the middle of Whoville Square. Well, what have we here? Asked Officer Houlihan. You got me, officer, I did it, the Grinch confessed. I am the Grinch who stole Christmas, and I am sorry. But the Whos were in no mood to punish the Grinch, excepting the mayor, to whom no Who listened anyhow. And that Christmas day ended up being the happiest that the Whos and the Grinch had ever known. Merry Grinchmas to all. I hope you liked it.